Hey,
Good
what's up,
evening.
guys? How's it going? Welcome to our webinar on how to get faster at logical reasoning. I'm Evan Jones.
Yeah, despite it says you're Joshua Craven, maybe you want to switch that. I'm
Yeah, here.
actually Joshua Craven, and that's Evan Jones.
Yeah,
We are the founders of Lawschooli.com, and we're here tonight with a quick webinar on logical reasoning, pacing. So,
yeah.
Evan,
Did we get a poll to figure out who all was taking the test on Saturday? We had to figure that a lot
well,
of you were going to be taking the test on Saturday. So we're going to kind of
well,
gear the first part of this presentation
I'm
to
gonna throw up a poll. Ignore the June, July, and September options there, unless of course are retaking. Then you can feel free to click those as well. But uh, really focus on those November and January or beyond, so you can get an idea of how the split's going. Right now, it's looking like 60-40 split or so, 58-42 split. We got a lot of people in here tonight. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to kind of talk. Evan and I are going to go through, a few points here, and then we're going to open it up to questions at the end. So we're going to talk tonight about logical reasoning, pacing, and timing, improving speed on logical reasoning. Now, at the end of the webinar, we're going to try to answer as many questions as possible. Um, you know, Ideally keep them on topic. But if you have other questions, and we've gotten
yeah.
through all the
I
LR
I
time.
really don't think it has to be that on topic too. Obviously,
Okay.
we'll cover on topic ones first, but once we're through our spiel here, we'll just open up any questions you guys have about admissions, the LSAT
Yeah.
generally. And you can even pop those questions out now, and we'll kind of try to work through them in order. So if
Yeah.
you came
And
with
it's
just a
it's
general question.
it's just Evan and I tonight. We don't have a third moderator. So if you notice me or Evan kind of playing on our computers here and looking at the screen, it's not that we're not paying attention. We are just looking at your questions and trying to go through them. So Evan, let's talk a little bit about ideal pacing for somebody who is maybe a high 160s, 170 scorer, or aiming to be, a really top scorer here on the LSAT. Let's start with that. For somebody who's really going for broke and they want to crush this test and get into that,
Yeah, yeah. If
break
you're
that
already at a
170.
high ability level, like what does ideal pacing look like on the LR section? We'll start with that because then that could be sort of a frame of reference. And then everything else we'll talk about will be helping you get there in terms of being at that ideal pacing. So, ideal pacing for me, I divide the section into three parts, each LR section that I do, and think about it in terms of hitting a time control for those specific parts. So the first time control, and probably arguably the most important for reasons we'll discuss, later, is take the first 10 questions. And these questions tend to be substantially easier than later questions, right? So take the first 10 questions, and generally for an ideal time control, you're trying to get through those in 10 minutes. So an average of 1 minute
Roughly.
per
Yeah.
question. Yeah, and some are going to take a little bit longer, whereas some, um, questions in there tend to almost be freebies that you can just like immediately snap to an answer. Um, and then the next part, and I think this is kind of like the hardest section, because sometimes the questions within this section fluctuate tremendously in difficulty. You might still have very easy questions, but then again, some really difficult ones are thrown in there. The next 15 questions, or sorry, the next 10 questions, you're going to want to try and do in 15 minutes. So that'd be an average of a minute and a half per question. So let me repeat that. The next 10 questions, about 11 to 19, 20, somewhere in there, you're going to try to do those in 15 minutes. So an average of a minute and a half. And these questions vary widely in difficulty. So even though you have that average, I think some of these questions you're shooting to do in a minute, and then some of them might be closer to 2 minutes, which is sort of like the upper limit for how long you ever want to spend on a question. And then if you do that, if you hit these 2 time controls, that leaves you a remaining 10 minutes in the section to do the last 5 questions. And for ideal pacing, I wouldn't really recommend that you use all that time necessarily for those 5 questions. You can also do it to review any questions that you skipped the first time around because they were too difficult, or if that was just part of your game plan, like if you were skipping parallel reasoning questions.
Yeah, so I thought for me personally, it was really important, like getting that 10 questions in 10 minutes, the first 10 questions in the LR section in about 10 minutes was really what helped me crack into the 170s. Now, Evan, say you're not somebody who's you're in the majority of people who aren't necessarily trying to crack into the 170s. Then sort of what are your time controls going to be? Say you're somewhere in the mid 150s to mid 160s in that big range there.
Yeah, so there it might change considerably, and unfortunately there at that level there's often not a set way that is always perfect for everybody. So what you end up having to do is experiment a little bit more. But people scoring in even the upper 150s, the very low 160s, they find that they're best off only attempting 20 questions. So you might start the section by bubbling in guess answers on the last 5 questions, and then go from there. And typically I think people in the 150s, are better off giving themselves an average 1 minute 15 seconds, 1 minute 30 seconds on even those first 10 questions. So you want to play around with the time controls there. But again, do your best to try to divide the section into 2 chunks there. If you're only doing 20 questions, divide it into those first 10 questions and try to hit a time control for there. And then think about your time control for the remaining 10 questions. But again, you might have to play around with it a little bit there. So I think that's kind of like a little discussion of ideal pacing. So let's discuss next, Josh, kind of what you do when you're really trying to get better. Like when you're, because I think most people, at least one point or another, struggle with finishing this section on time. So what are some things that we can do to pick up the pace, so to speak?
Yeah, so for me, one of the biggest things was avoiding these time sinks, these time traps, right? There's always a few questions in every LR section that are made to kind of separate the 170s from the 180s, right? And if you're in the 150s and you're attempting these questions, you might be sinking 4 minutes into a question, right? So it's recognizing these questions that you're sinking tons of time, and maybe it's a certain question type. Like Evan, what's a question type that for you took a lot longer than average?
Yeah, I think just by design, parallel reasoning questions are going to take incredibly long. Even the easy ones, just because of the density of reading through all those answer choices, you're looking at about 2 minutes generally.
Yeah, even a really easy parallel reasoning might take you longer than normal just because of the way it's set up. It's a lot of words, and just the way it's set up, it's gonna be a time sink. So if you're somebody who's really struggling with time, you might want to pay attention to that. If you're noticing you're sinking 3 minutes into that question, move on. Right. Another big thing is recognizing when you're running into a really difficult question, and a lot of times those questions are set up to where you can narrow it down. You can eliminate 3 answer choices fairly easily, right? And then there's 2 answer choices that you have to decide between. And maybe it's almost 50-50 for you, right? You have a really difficult choice, eliminating, that 4th answer choice to arrive on your answer choice that you're going to select as correct, right? And in that choice, in that situation, I found that oftentimes, spending an extra minute or 90 seconds trying to eke out that extra maybe 10% chance that I'll get this question correct isn't worth it. And just kind of taking that 50-50 shot and moving forward rather than sinking that time into an already difficult question is oftentimes a better strategy, right? Because if you're already struggling with this problem, chances are you know, a 50-50 shot is
Additional
as good as
time
it's going to
spent
get,
on
right?
yeah,
Yeah, think
it's
of it
not
in terms of
real difference.
marginal opportunity cost, right? Moving on to that next question is going to be more beneficial.
Yeah,
Anything else?
because every point is worth the same here, right? You know, so
Right.
if you can then get on to another question, you always have the opportunity, especially once you're hitting ideal pacing, to come back and look at these questions with fresh eyes again at the end of the section, right? So, but being able to compartmentalize and be like, I'm done with this question, I'm moving on. That's an important skill that everyone who can talk about themselves as kind of an LSAT master is able to do, right? Okay, so and this is another big one for me. When you're trying to speed up, I think that we've found when we look at where students are going wrong, it's not that they're spending too long slightly on every question. It's that they're spending way too long on these time traps. So we talked about that. But what's another thing, Josh, that you can do to speed up? You know, thinking about those first 10 questions, especially.
Well, so yeah, all right. So there's what I like to say is there's two different sort of extremes that you can focus on, right? It's speeding up on these hard questions, right? And that's I think what most people think. Okay, these LR questions that are hard, I've got to get better at those. I've got to get faster at those so that I can, you know, make it all the way to the end. And that's where most people focus most of their attention on. I think that's a little bit of the wrong way to think about it, right? For me, there's this other extreme where you've got these easy questions, like we talked about earlier, these 10 questions that are at the front of the section that are generally going to be pretty easy. And it's a lot easier to get faster at those questions and leave yourself a little more time for the hard questions than it is to get faster at the hard questions. Let me say that again. It's easier, I find, to get faster at these easy questions and leave yourself with extra time to do the hard questions than it is to actually get faster at the hard questions. And I think everybody spends most of their time trying to get fast at these hard questions when actually you can save more time by speeding up on the easy questions. And for me, it was
so play around with it.
Mostly a matter of confidence, right? I wanted to claw after those points. I knew that those points were on the table.
Josh, can you hear me? I think you might have
Without
lost.
having taken. Can you hear me?
Now I can. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now, like, given that the test is in a couple days here, you're going to want to at least test out this method a couple times before you just go in on test day and go really fast, right? So given that we are so close to test day, make sure that any advice that you hear tonight, you're testing out on your actual time practice tests before you go in and use it on test day. Like, just let me give that caveat for this whole talk tonight. Like, you don't want to take any on test day, you don't want to go in on test day and try anything that you haven't tried before on practice tests, right? So no matter how great the advice sounds, don't try anything new on test day that you haven't road tested on a actual time practice test. Evan, how about any other things that I missed there?
Yeah, just one quick thing. We already talked about skipping parallel reasoning questions and coming back a little, but that's a strategy that I used. I think I was still doing that on test day. You know, just recognizing that parallel reasoning questions are super time consuming. I'd rather not even look at those until I've gotten everything else out of the way. And then I'm going to come back. So that's a big thing that just nearly everybody can do. I think to just, it's a trick basically to get more confidence because, you know, if you only have those left, you're not as worried about anything else by the time you're doing them. And I think you can focus a little bit more because those questions really kind of take a lot of mental focus. The other big thing is consider switching to the stimulus first, right? Reading the stimulus first. When you have a question, The part that's the bulkier part right at the beginning, that longer paragraph that contains the content that you're analyzing, we call that the stimulus. And then the part that asks you an actual question, that's the question stem, right? And a lot of people out there read the stem first, but if you read the stem first, you're sort of mentally burdening yourself with an extra ball to juggle that while you're reading that stimulus, you're kind of like thinking about too much rather than just analyzing the stimulus, right? So we advocate reading the stimulus first, and that way you're not juggling extra balls, you're just analyzing the argument itself in there, forming first impressions, thinking about, critical stuff like whether the conclusion is supported by the premises without kind of that extra noise in your head. And I think that can really help lead to extra speed.
Evan, I think I cut out when I was talking about how you actually get faster at those easy questions in the first 10. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the key thing is just experimentation, right? You might, until you try it, you don't know if you can retain accuracy while dropping your time. So try to go a little bit faster. And if you notice you're losing accuracy, pull back. Don't go that fast. So it's a thing of experimentation. And that really brings us to our next point, which is
before I move on, hopefully I don't cut out this time. Practice doing sprints, okay? Go into a bunch of old practice tests. Pull out the first 10 LR questions in a bunch of old practice tests, maybe 5, maybe 10, and drill those LR sections. Do the 10 and 10 drills and see what maybe pull out 10 LR sections. Do the first 10 questions in 10 minutes. Do those as drills and then grade them and see how you're doing, right? And if you're missing 0 every time, then you can do it. If you're missing maybe 2, then maybe slow down a little, maybe take 11 minutes, right? Push yourself to get 10 and 10. Try it through a series of rapid fire drills where you're really pressing yourself, setting a timer at 10 minutes and saying, I'm going to push through these 10 questions in 10 minutes and see how it works. By experimenting like that, you'll find out if you can trust yourself enough to, if you're good enough to actually do that in time conditions, and you'll push yourself for speed. You'll get faster through those. And that for me, by doing those 10 and 10 drills, that's how I was able to conquer that speed issue. Okay, sorry about that. I think I cut out
internet issues, I think there, but
always.
All right, that is just always good. So what can you do? Okay, well, so the last point that we really want to do here before we kind of wrap up our discussion of getting faster and kind of go to open questions is one is training, right? And then the next thing we'll talk about is building confidence. But training is super important. The LSAT is just like any skill that you're looking to develop whatsoever, right? If you want to learn to play golf, you could read textbooks all day, right? But until you go out and actually put it into practice and do those swings and make corrections and adjustments in your motion thousands and thousands of times, you're not going to see real progress out there. And the LSAT actually, in terms of learnability, we see people make very rapid progress with this skill, but you still have to give yourself the training. And as you give yourself that training, mostly in the form of doing time tests over and over again, you're going to naturally pick up a lot of speed. In fact, during the untimed phase of your prep, when you're just learning how to do these questions, you're probably building speed unconsciously as you do it just by familiarity, right? So just never I'm
going to actually stop you there. Could you talk a little bit more about that, Evan? Sort of untimed versus time prep, especially as it relates to logical reasoning?
Yeah, so initially, when you learn how to do these questions, right? I've seen some terrible advice out there, like the LSAT is a time test. You should always, always, always be learning and practicing under time pressure. Well, that's just horrible advice because these questions are incredibly difficult. They're incredibly complicated. And when you've never seen the patterns that are contained in these questions and never done this type of analytical reasoning, your brain just isn't good at it, right? So initially, usually for the first month and a half or even longer, if you're on a longer schedule, we really think that people should be prepping untimed and giving your brain a time to think as carefully as possible about the actual logic and reasoning contained in the problems. And by doing that, the great thing about the LSAT is any problem that you find on the LSAT, is similar to one that's been on there before. So by the time you get to test day and you're doing these problems, they'll be very, very similar to problems that you've done before. They'll probably have the same logical structure, right? But now your brain is familiar with that logical structure because you've looked at those questions before, and that familiarity is going to lead to being much faster, right? And that's part of training. And initially working untimed and going slow and just making sure you understand questions is the best way to eventually build speed. It's kind of ironic that it works that way, but I think it's good for people to learn because they can just relax and spend time with these problems in the early parts of their prep.
Yeah. All right. Next point.
Okay, so the last big topic that we really wanted to cover here is building confidence to build speed. And I've just touched on that a little bit, right? When you have familiarity with the patterns in these questions, they can start feeling like free points because you're reading the question stimulus and it just snaps that you know exactly what kind of reasoning is occurring here. And you've seen this pattern before, and you know what the question is going to be testing you on. The most common one where this happens, would be flaw questions. If you sort of recognize the pattern of reasoning in the flaw, it's one that you've seen before. Another really common case where this happens is with cause and effect reasoning within strengthen and weaken questions. Once you see that this is a question about causal reasoning, that it's a causal hypothesis, all of a sudden you have a pre-prepared pattern of how you're going to weaken or strengthen that cause and effect relationship, right? And then it almost becomes like a free point that you can just get really quickly because of familiarity with that form of reasoning. So that's kind of like where we thought that tonight we are going to sort of talk about how we like to teach that going forward. And also, I won't hide the ball here. We are kind of doing something exciting tonight for us personally, because it's been like many years in the making. So Josh, do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Well, yeah, sure. We are launching a course. We're actually not launching it till Monday, but we figured since we were giving this webinar tonight, we might as well have something to offer everyone who took the time to show up. You can pre-order it tonight. You go to lsatcourses.com, lsatcourses.com. I think it's like $75 if you order it between now and Monday.
Yeah,
so I think it was 75.
We've at this point, since we're just starting out releasing the course and we want to get it out to people and have as many people as possible using it so we can, get the word out, for you guys who came and saw, came on our email list and signed up, we wanted to give a special something. So generally, I think it's going to end up being a lot more expensive come around Monday for the full launch, but
yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about what went into writing this course, and then after that we'll talk. So if you're taking the LSAT in January or beyond, we think this course would be great. And then after that we'll talk a little bit about sort of somebody who's taking it in the next few days. Since 60% of you, it looks like, are taking it in a few days, this course probably isn't a great option for you unless you decide to retake after then. So then we'll talk about sort of a couple things that we can do to improve in the next few days. And then we'll open it up to questions. So Evan, talk a little bit about, how you designed this course and what went into it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so, building on that idea of confidence helping with speed, when I went to write this course, what I was trying to do was address the gap between how good I felt that I was at the LSAT when I took back in 2008, and how good I am now after teaching it for years and years. And, to the extent possible, I want to get you guys closer to where I am now. Because if I had the skills I had now back then, I think I would have gotten even a better score than my 173. And I would have done so with like lower stress and more confidence. And really, I think that how that came about, this greater sense of confidence, is retooling my understanding of logic and argumentation theory so that I know exactly what the people who actually wrote these questions know. And it's not some like esoteric, obscure knowledge that you can't obtain, right? To know what the people writing these questions know, you have to know about as much and maybe a little bit more than you would learn from, a basic logic class where you learn symbolic logic and argumentation theory at the university level. So, it's not this crazy obscure thing that, is impossible to obtain. I've talked to some people over the years in the prep world, and a lot of people wanted to go about teaching it that way, but have kind of thought that maybe students aren't up for it or that it would take too much time. But you know what? Like, if you're going to law school, you guys all went to college, right? So, I think that the people who are going to go on to get high scores are more than capable of absorbing argumentation theory on that level, of learning to analyze arguments on that level. And so what we really focus on with the course then is like learning logic straight up to the point where if I give you an argument or any like block of set of facts or anything like that, you can just analyze it and tell me what's going on. Tell me if it's deductive reasoning, if it's inductive reasoning instead, and you can look at the premises and the conclusion, pull out the parts, and talk about why the conclusion is or is not supported, and what could be done to fix it. You can maybe tell me whether there's any implied premises such that it's elliptical reasoning. You can tell me whether it's maybe a casual form of argumentation, like an analogy or something. And people who can do this stuff, which trust me, the makers of the test can do that stuff. People who can do that kind of analysis just have no trouble with any task the LSAT throws at you. And, to me, that's different than maybe having some strategies that you can sort of blindly apply without thinking, which is really kind of what I had when I went in to do the test. That can work, and if you can do that, you can hack through and get your way to a good score, but it's not really true confidence. And, we want you to have true confidence because that's what leads to getting a good score, maybe the first time around, as opposed to, sort of hacking your way blindly through it. So, yeah,
absolutely. With that. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how many lessons, how the course is structured?
Yeah, again, we want to get through this stuff quickly, but, I think the big difference too is we have text lessons in addition to video. So sort of everything you learn, you're going to learn it through a carefully written text lesson that was probably refined over years and years and years, as part of our mastermind group. And then in addition, we have a video lesson that sort of reteaches it. So I think with things like 7Sage, you have the video and then the text below is just the transcript of that video. We wanted to sort of have the video be a supplement and augmenting the text lessons. So that's sort of a different thing there as well. And then a lot of quiz content, and then a lot of discussion, analysis of real problems. However, we do want to point out there one way that we diverge from everybody else in terms of how we present question analysis, because most of these courses that are much more expensive are going to be providing the LSAT questions as well. So why don't we do that? And we should probably discuss that quickly.
Yeah, so I mean, we want you to buy them from Amazon, where it's cheaper for you to buy the LSAT prep tests on Amazon than it is for us to license them from LSAT. For you to buy a pack of 10 prep tests from Amazon, it's going to cost you maybe $18, $16 for some of the older ones, maybe up to $24, $25, something like that. Yeah. For us to license those same 10 LSAT prep tests, and this is what none of the other companies will tell you, is it would cost us, maybe $6 a prep test. So we're talking about $60. And then what the companies will do is they'll double that and sell it to you for $120, and they'll package that into the whole thing, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so the same 10 questions that you could buy on Amazon for 25, you'll end up paying about $120 for, because they'll have to license them, and then they'll put their markup in and pass along to you. Anyway, so buy the prep tests on Amazon, where it's a hell of a lot cheaper.
Cheapest. I mean, that makes sense. I think LSAT kind of wanted to like maximize profits from the sale of their own books, so they can sell it the most cheaply, and it's been that way for years. So when you see like an LSAT course that costs $1,000 for an online course, I think probably the biggest part of that expense is licensing those questions. And they're exactly the same questions that you're going to get most cheaply off of Amazon, and Amazon, of course, drives the price way down on those things. So like over the years, they've gotten even cheaper and cheaper. So yeah, like Josh said, it's like,
it's real cheap now.
$1.50 a prep test, which is just crazy.
LSATcourses.com is the URL. Type that in, LSATcourses.com. That'll redirect you over to the page on Lawschooli. Now, because this is a pre-sale, like, we don't have the landing pages all written out. We don't have all the details in there for you. But it's roughly how many lessons, Evan?
I want to say like
lessons or something like that. Yeah, probably 200 lessons. It covers RC, LG, and LR, and it's all pre-recorded stuff. So it's on demand. You use it whenever you want. You'll have access to it as long as we are around. So it's not like a 90-day thing. If our website is still up and we're still alive and kicking, you'll have access to it.
A lot of these companies seem to do the 3 months to use it thing. Like, and I had Themis when I did my bar prep. You had to do that. Like, you had 3 months to do it. And it's just like life gets in the way, like, so sometimes people can't study. They'll start and then realize they can't study until later, even next year, So we don't want to screw people like when stuff comes up and you need to use it later, I'm not looking to grab money that hard. It's strange. I don't really know why this industry kind of has so many people that are out for money grabs like that, but I mean, it just is that way. So
it is what it is. All right. So will this course include access to contact you with additional questions? Evan, this was a question.
Wait, sorry, what was that?
Does that price include access, to contact you with additional questions and whatnot? Or
that's the thing. I mean,
a better option needs a little more hand holding and a little more question access.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other ways that we're going to keep this, so cheap for the time being is that, you're not going to have maybe that robust support. I'm going to try to answer anything I see in the comments, and your peers can also help you out with that. If you want access to us for individual questions, you still have the option always to join the mastermind group, which is and always has been like a way to get in touch with us very frequently. Like every Tuesday, we would do something exactly like this webinar where, you can just come and answer, have as many questions as you want answered. And then we have forums where you can talk to us. This course is going to be, of course, included as a part of that. All the material in the course was kind of tested and run in that mastermind group over the last 3-4 years. So, that's always an option too. But this is, a cheaper thing.
So long story short, if you want to ask questions and have more interaction and come into something like this on a weekly basis where you can ask questions, then you're going to want to join the mastermind group. I think it's still pretty cheap. It's still one of the best deals in LSAT prep. It's, I think, $159 or something like that right now.
Yeah, and now that's the full course, plus access.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about all right, so LSATcourses.com. Check that out if you're interested. It's on sale until this is sort of a pre-launch, although you will have access to it as soon as you purchase, and up until Monday when we actually do the hard launch, the real launch on Monday. it'll be only $75 or like $75.99, something ridiculously cheap. So if you are going to take the LSAT with, unless you're taking it in a couple days, it's really kind of a no-brainer here. Now, if you are taking it in a couple days, then Evan, give a couple words of advice on how you can kind of prepare. We've only got a couple days. What should they do what's like the biggest bang for your buck if you're prepping in the next couple days?
I mean,
and then we'll go and take questions.
Yeah, the biggest bang for your buck, actually, I think at this point is going to come not from, worrying too much about the questions themselves and focusing more on you. Make sure you get some sleep. Make sure you eat properly. I took a day off before the test because I noticed that for me, when I took a day off, that was like kind of winding a spring. And the next day I would score really, really well. Right. So on the day before the test, I just chilled. I went and played some tennis with my brother, took a walk. Thankfully, it was June. So, it was no problem doing that stuff. And then I watched a movie and ready for bedtime. Josh, on the other hand, did not.
I have a bit of a different personality than Evan. And I think this is one of the things about the LSAT that you'll find is like not everything works for everyone. So if you're like me and you find that if you take a day off of prep, it kind of causes anxiety. It makes me more anxious to take that time off, and I feel like I'm always at my best if I've done a prep test the day before, if I've done at least a couple sections the day before. I didn't take a day off before the LSAT. I went prep test, time prep test every day up during the last week or so. So if you're like me and you feel like you're somebody who takes a day off and then you come back and take another prep test or something like that, and you're a little rusty, your skills aren't quite as sharp as they were, then feel free to take a prep test the day before the LSAT. Don't grade it. It doesn't, that's the one test during your prep that I would say don't grade. Throw it away. You don't want to get like psyched out by seeing a little score drop the day before the test. So if you do decide to take one, just to kind of keep your pacing up, definitely don't grade it. Just throw it away. It's just to kind of keep yourself in that headspace, keep your sense of pacing up. Any other?
Yeah, another big thing, another big last minute tip, Josh, that we tell our students all the time in the mastermind group is remember your brain runs off of sugar. If you run out, you're going to be experiencing glucose depletion, which kind of can interfere with your short-term memory. And this test is like a test of short-term memory, basically.
Yeah, it was studies recently in the last couple of years came out saying, showing that, how like marathon runners will have those like weird squeezy gel things that they'll have to have just to kind of get that glucose back through that physical activity. Studies have come out recently saying that mental activity, especially difficult like cognitive reasoning, likewise depletes glucose. And when your glucose levels drop with that activity, your cognitive function, your ability to reason actually goes down. So during that break, maybe have a little sugar. I know a lot of people will just like go and have a water or a Diet Coke thinking that's like the healthier option. But actually getting a little sugar in, whether you eat it or drink it, it's going to be good to replenish those glucose levels. All right, let's hop into questions now. Remember, lsatcourses.com if you want to purchase that course. And now we're going to hop into questions. We're going to go until for the next 20 minutes in questions if we keep them coming. And then we're going to cut it off at an hour. So will this event have playback? Yes, I'll post it. We'll post the video. I'm pretty sure the system will email you a copy of this if you RSVP'd. If not, I'm going to post it to the post on Lawschooli.com that is up regarding this. Let's see. So yeah, if you go to the Lawschooli.com, the webinar, how to speed up in logical reasoning, I'll post the recording there.
Oh yeah, and won't the recording be just in the post too? That just yeah,
we'll put it in that post.
Okay. Yeah, it'll be in the post that you saw when you signed up for this.
Exactly, that's what I just was saying. All right.
I was trying to charge my computer here. Yeah.
All right. Although timing is Evan, I'm gonna read the question and then you take a stab at it. Oh, this is a great one to start with. what's your bubble in strategy for LR?
Yeah. So since we're talking about LR, I'll cover that first. For me, I liked to bubble after every single LR question because, I think it reduced the chances of miss bubbling. And for me, I saw that as like a little break, right? So, I would bubble in the answer to the question, then I'd close my eyes and take just a little breather and then snap back to focus, and I feel like that was kind of like a meditative thing for me that,
and for me, it was 100% before every page turn. So I do, both pages in front of me. Before I turn the page, I would transcribe the bubbles. And I think two final points. Notice once again, Evan and I have different strategies, and mine's not necessarily better just because I got a 177 and he got a 173. I had to throw that in there, right? No, but I'm serious. My strategy isn't necessarily better because I got a couple extra points in the LSAT, right? Use the strategy that works for you.
So like whatever.
Yeah. So use the strategy that works best for you. Test that strategy. Get used to it. Do it at least, from now until test day, if you're taking in a couple days here. But figure out what works for you. With any tip, any advice you get from whether it's from us or from anyone else, test it on actual time sections. See if it works, and then make that adjustment. Adopt it into your strategy if it works. If it doesn't work, throw it out, right? Like there's not one thing that's going to work for every. That's like the one way. Although a lot of people will tell you there is one way. Evan and I had different strategies. We both did quite well on this test and got into the same law school with the same scholarship. So, a law school application question. I think I could get a couple more points on the LSAT by taking it again in January and applying right after that, which will be a little bit later in the cycle. Or I could just apply with a lower score in the next few weeks, which is earlier in the cycle. Which one would be better off? For reference, I'm teaching in the 154 to 156 range right now, but I think in 2 months I could get that up to 157 to 160. Thanks in advance. Well, okay, let's just say if you could guarantee me that you'll hit that 160 mark, then it's absolutely no. If you're gonna go in and say I got a 155 versus a 160 in 2 months, which one should I apply with? 100%, I'd say 160 in 2 months. You're gonna get better results. 100%. There's no way,
no question that
no conceivable universe in which 5 points is not a big enough impact that 2 months later in the cycle is going to be not worth that extra 5 points.
You'd be a much stronger candidate later with that higher score. There's no question about that. The only thing is we don't know 100% if you're going to get that score because nothing's guaranteed in life, and especially not on the LSAT. So the best strategy here may be to apply now and then retake anyways, and then that'll take a little bit of pressure off of you, and then schools when you get the retake score are going to reevaluate your application as if they're looking at a completely new application. So there you have that option.
And another option would be to take the LSAT and continue studying, right, as you're waiting for your results. And the results will take a few weeks to come out. See where you're prep testing at during 3 weeks from now, or 3 weeks from test day, when you actually get the results. Then you'll actually have hard numbers to see what you actually did, how well you did, and you'll see where you are with the extra 3 years worth of prep, and then you'll be able to make a informed decision at that point whether or not you've made progress and whether or not your score is in the range that you.
Yeah, and I mean, like, part of this depends on your personal preferences too, because there's a lot of people who, they don't want to apply with a 154. If they get a 154, that may not be in the range of scores where they're like happy with the school options there. So, depending on your preferences, you might just want to wait. But then on the other hand, some people who want to go to a certain local law school, may be perfectly happy with the 154. In which case, the retake is mostly a matter of trying to go for additional scholarship money, So a little bit of this depends on your personal circumstances.
All right. Although timing is not an issue most of the time for me on logical reasoning, I have issues picking between 2 answer choices after narrowing down the answer to 2. Generally, I miss 2 or 3 questions that I've narrowed it down to 2, and with 1 being correct, and I'm picking the wrong answer.
Well,
how do I more efficiently pick between those 2 when I'm able to narrow it down? How do I more efficiently pick?
Well, here's the thing. The questions are designed to do that, right? They're designed, most questions will only have 2 attractive answers. Then now they differ in whether the one that's wrong is a trap or whether it's just a less good answer, right? And I think that, unfortunately, learning how to choose between those 2, that's the whole game. That's like everything you're learning when you do LR. Is to get the skills to choose between those 2. So there's no shortcuts there. There's nothing I can say right now that's going to make a lot that would, change how you do that. But what I can tell you is that my entire course is designed to give you the skills to make that decision. So to the point where, nowadays when I do these questions, I don't really see the second attractive answer anymore because, I've just got good enough judgment to know straight up why that's wrong. Unless, of course, it's a question type and a question where there's 2 answers in play. If you read those section directions, some questions have, 2 answers that could conceivably answer the question. So at that point, it's your job to pick the best answer. And again, I give you the tools to do that with those question types where that can happen. But people who can analyze arguments better and really understand the structure of the argument and talk about it, they can make these judgment calls much more quickly and more correctly, and they can vocalize why they're picking an answer over another one. I would say that's the biggest piece of advice that I want to give for this person right now is at least try to vocalize why you're picking one over the other. And that way, when you're wrong, you can then try and you have something to sort of judge, like where you went wrong. And this is one of the reasons why we do really recommend people take the mastermind study group, because one of the most common things people do is just post a question there and say, I was thinking this and this when I picked this answer choice. Where did I go wrong? And I can just look at your reasoning right there and tell you where you went astray. So that can be really helpful.
Thank you, Evan. All right, we got another question. Are you diagramming must be true questions most of the time by the time you get to test day, or do you think by test day you're aiming to be at the point where you don't have to diagram as much anymore?
By test day, I felt that it was actually fairly rare that I would need to diagram because at that point I'd seen these structures so often that, like, in my head, like, okay, I know exactly this structure. Like, this is a complex conditional. Like, one of the necessary conditions hasn't been met. So, there's no way that the sufficient condition could have occurred. Something like that. I'll see that pattern. Like, I don't need to put it on paper. But what we do find is that you never get to that point unless you learn, and in an under untimed conditions, usually, learn how to analyze it until your brain can see that pattern. And usually that involves writing it down. So what we do is, we give you the tools to write it down correctly, and then you're just automatically going to know later whether you need them or not. That's something that comes
through practice. And what I like to say is over diagram in the early stages of your plan.
Diagram everything.
Diagram as much as you can, because that's how you hone your skills. That's how you get good at diagramming, and that's how you learn to decide whether or not you need to diagram something, or whether it would be useful, or whether it's going to be time efficient, right? So over diagram in the beginning. Spend a lot of time diagramming. That way, by test day, you can almost see it in your mind if you've done it enough times on paper under untimed conditions, right? And you've done it over and over again enough to where now you don't have to do it. It's just like, addition, right? When you were a kid, you had to, maybe use your fingers or whatever to kind of count on your hands, and then it just becomes, you can see it in your mind eventually because you've done it enough times, right? I don't know if that was a great analogy, but That's the only thing that came to mind.
Yeah.
What are your personal?
Well, sorry, just let me say the thing is, I give you all the tools you need to diagram any question that should be diagrammed. If you don't have those tools, there might be cases where you do have the tools and don't understand that you were supposed to use them, and that would be something we want to hopefully avoid. But if you can't diagram it with the tools I've given you, the test makers don't want you diagramming it. And at that point, if you still can't solve it, well, guess what? It's a really, really hard question, and it's probably one of those time traps that we talked about way back at the very beginning of this webinar. But for the most part, once you've been through the practice, like our course really places an incredibly huge emphasis on must be true questions, because we've found that people who can do them can do anything else. So even though they're not that prevalent, especially these days, in terms of questions on the test, like a percentage of questions on the test, the people who can do must be true well, and go through the process of learning how to do it well, score high. Like it's just a proxy for your ability in other areas.
And those skills tend to translate well into other question types. All right. What is your personal opinion on blind review, Evan?
Yeah, so we don't advocate full blind review, which I believe some other people do, where you redo everything, because I just don't think there's a whole lot of benefit in redoing a question that was incredibly easy, and that time could be spent elsewhere. So what we advocate is a modified blind review, where as you go through the test that you're doing, you're going to mark any question that you're finding difficult. Like, so any question where you're not 90%, 90% or better certain that you've gotten the right answer, you're going to be circling that to come back and review it. And of course, you're going to review anything that you eventually get wrong. But, the initial phase of blind review is reviewing all of these questions that you marked as difficult. And it's critical to get into the habit of marking questions that you consider difficult anyways, because that's how you find your way back at the end of the section if you have time to review those questions at the end. Under ideal pacing, remember, you had 2 minutes to do the last 5 questions, but you don't often need that whole time. And then you can use that spare time to go back and reattempt, become more certain about questions that you weren't quite certain on, etc.
All right. For the last 8 minutes or so, we're gonna go a little more rapid fire and try to get as many of these questions, because I'm seeing we have at least 30 questions and so let's try to get as many as we can in the next 8 minutes or so. Ready?
Yeah.
What's the website for the course again? LSATcourses.com.
Yeah, can you send that to everybody? Just do,
I think I
LSAT.
did. LSATcourses.com. Yeah, send it in the chat.
Can you also just find it on the website in the products too?
Yeah. Or you just go to our website, go to Lawschooli.com, click products and services, and that'll take you to the shop. And then you'll be able to see it there. It's called full LSAT course. It's got a picture of me and Evan. Master the LSAT, it says. All right. I tuned in minutes ago. Would you retouch on the logical reasoning tips? If you tuned in, there's going to be a replay. Go to Lawschooli.com and go to the post, where you found this, signed up for this webinar in the first place.
Yeah,
there'll be a replay. You can rewatch the whole thing. I took my first LSAT in September, and I'm retaking this weekend. I used the majority of the recent practice tests, 60 to 84, when studying for September. So when practicing for my second try, I was mostly using PTs in the 40s and 50s. My LR has consistently been -0 to -3, and I'm feeling pretty confident going into test day. However, I know more recent LR sections tend to be tougher than some of the older ones. Do you think that this will negatively affect my score on test day? Do you believe there's a significant difference in difficulty between?
I really don't feel that there is that significant a difference. And thinking that there is just gonna, even supposing there was, I would probably lie to you right now. No, I wouldn't, because I always try to be honest with you guys. But it's just not beneficial to think that there's a big difference, because with LR especially, there really hasn't been. Sometimes with games lately, they're throwing curveballs with games that are a little harder to diagram than games from 10 years ago. But that's really the only thing that I've noticed. The LR, not substantially harder.
Well, here's the real interesting thing. Here's the most interesting point that I think is important here. A 170 10 years ago is still the same as it was 10 years ago, right? Yeah, the section difficulty might be different, but it's still as difficult to get a 170 today as it was 10 years
that's
ago.
how they designed the test, right? So that it's just as hard from test to test to get a score. So, even if the test is subjectively feels more difficult, then usually the curve will be more generous and you'll end up with the same score.
So yeah, either the curve is going to account for it or the other sections of the test will account for it. If LR got a little harder, then LG is going to be a little easier. If RC is a little harder, then LR is going to be, it all comes out in the wash, right? So go into that test as confident as possible. It doesn't matter what practice test you've been prepping on. You're going to be fine and you're going to go in there and crush it, right? That's the attitude you have to have walking into test day. You can't be second guessing. Oh, maybe these LR questions are going to be so different on test day than no, it's the same shit that you've been doing time and time again. You've been through, it's not like you haven't seen the most recent prep test. You've done those two. You're going to be fine. Go in there and crush it. You've got this. Don't second guess.
People have big problems here. It's probably all nerves and, it's the best thing you can do.
Check those nerves at the door. You've got this. You're missing 0 LR questions.
That's where I was most of.
You were awesome at this.
Where I was like the last.
It's exactly where I was too. Stay confident. You've got this. All right. Don't psych yourself out trying to overanalyze whether. No, you've got this. You're doing really well, and you're going to be fine. Go in there with confidence and crush this test. What if you already have all the prep tests? Does it still make sense to buy the course? Yeah, maybe you missed this. Our course doesn't include prep tests. That's why it's so cheap. We don't include the prep test. We want you to buy them on Amazon. That's the cheapest way to buy the prep test, period. Buy them on Amazon, or, if you've already got them, use them, and you can use our course. Should I skip 15 to 20 and try the 21 through 26 questions first?
No, I think, generally the questions, the section proceeds from least to most difficult.
There are some tricky ones in that 15 to 20 range, but there's sometimes difficult ones in the 21 to 26 range. I think trying to game it there, I personally believe the best way is front to back, and I think that's
let's just stick with that. I mean, we could talk about that for a long time,
but like we said, test it. If it works for you, go for it. With anything. Law school application question. I think I could get a couple more points by taking the LSAT again in January. Oh, we already answered this one. It was a re-ask. How did you guys manage time in terms of staying focused? I do well in games, but find myself not able to manage and stay completely focused when timed.
It's just a matter of practice. I have pretty bad ADD, undiagnosed, but it's diagnosed with my identical twin, and the thing is, it's just you gotta practice, and that muscle gets stronger when you work it. But maybe for people who have trouble with focus, they have to make sure that they don't overdo it. If you have a couple days in a row where you just can't focus at all on the test, maybe try pulling back and taking a day off, and then come at it with renewed energy. But the best thing I think for me to deal with that was to make sure I blocked off time in advance for when it was going to be LSAT study time. And then when it wasn't LSAT study time, I'm trying to do everything I can to not even think about it, So usually, most days I'd study 2 to 3 hours. And then on harder days, I would study 4 to 5 hours, something like that. But I would set, to the extent possible, just a block. And within that block, I'm studying for the LSAT. And when it's not that time, I'm doing anything else to avoid thinking about the LSAT.
Would you recommend using a watch to track timing? I'm going to use this as an opportunity to pitch AnswerWatch, answerwatch.com. It is a watch that I designed specifically for the LSAT. The first watch I designed was a Mastermind watch. The watch was too good. LSAT banned it because it was so good. So don't use the Mastermind watch anymore. Use the AnswerWatch, answerwatch.com. It's yes, you have to have a watch. All right, you don't have to have my watch that I designed. Although I do think my watch is ideal because it divides the section into, or the, each section into 4 different subsections, which is great for games and reading comprehension. It also uses a rotating bezel, which makes it really easy to reset the time and keep track. But regardless, even if you just use the watch that you have on your desk, you have to have a watch. You don't want to go
Yeah, and
into
you have to practice with the watch in advance. We see people who are just starting practicing with their watch 2 days before the test, and it may be too late for some people to make that change, but get used to your watch. Like basically when you start doing full-time tests, you want to be using your watch so that just by glancing at the minute hand, you know exactly where you're at. You're training your brain to instantly recognize that. You can shave seconds
yes,
off your
yes, you have to have a watch. I mean, you don't have to, but if you're looking at the clock and then trying to like do the math in your head and say, okay, it's what this time, so 35 minutes from now is going to be this time, you're wasting way too much mental energy. You either need like the answer watch or a watch with a rotating bezel that you make your own little 35-minute mark on, or worst case scenario, you take a regular watch, you set it to noon, and then you push in the thing, and at 12:35 the test is over. So those are the 3 different ways to use watch. Make sure you use a watch. Time it now from now, every time section that you do now through testing. How much lower than the median score that you hold on? How much lower than the median score that you can apply to a school and still get a good chance of acceptance?
I mean, if you're above the 75th percentile, or sorry, the 25th percentile, you're still well within their range. And if your GPA is better than the median, maybe it might compensate, and you'd have a very high chance of getting in.
Right.
But yeah, once you're below, once you're below the 25th, you start to get more.
You have a 25% chance that a person in your class is going to have a better, or have an LSAT score the same as yours or below, right? That means, that's the best way to look at it. If you have an LSAT score at the 50th percent, the median, 50% of the class will have LSAT scores below that, right? So, that's sort of, use it as a 25% chance, 50% chance. Like I think that's the best way to think of it, the easiest way to think of it. Regarding your personal statement editing services, Evan, what would you say that it's worth it to buy a package even if I'm not sure how my LSAT score is going to go, and I'm just on the fence since the personal statement won't matter if my LSAT score is low, right? Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not to the point where you're even sure you're going to apply yet, like if you don't know you have a score that's good enough for you to apply to law school, I would hold off on, buying any kind of editing services.
Yeah.
If on the other hand, you're already practicing at a level where if you got if that practice score came through for you on test day, you would apply. Well, yeah, then it's time to start getting your essay.
If you're going to apply regardless, of where your LSAT score lands, then I think it's worth it, right? I mean, but if you're saying if I don't do well on the LSAT, I'm just gonna give up. Well, I think that's a bad attitude to have. But yeah, you don't want to if you're not gonna apply, you're not gonna apply. Don't waste your money. But if you're going to apply and say your LSAT score is a couple points below where it needs to be, then maybe polishing that essay is even more important. So it's good. It's going to be a personal call for you, but I wouldn't wait too long in the process, right? Because you want to sort of. This is my final thing I'll say, and then we can move on because I know it's getting late and we have a few more questions to get through. Don't wait too long in the process. You don't want to be waiting until mid-January to get your essay together, right? You want to get your essay together now. By now I mean first focus on the LSAT, but on Sunday, you want to move on and start focusing on your personal statement and getting all the other app materials ready. Would you recommend using a watch to track time? Answer that. I've been told that hiring a consultant for specific schools when writing a personal statement is crucial for top 10 schools. Nah, not crucial.
No,
I got into a top 10 school. I haven't gotten into a top 10 school. A lot of the people that I knew.
Unfortunately, guys, the reality is, and I'll tell this honestly to anyone before they, would buy my editing services. The essay, doesn't move the needle that much. Mostly where you can get in is going to be 90% or better predicted on two numbers, your GPA and your LSAT. In terms of you'll hear about these earth-shattering essays that got somebody into Yale when they had crappy numbers. I've been reading like personal statements for years, and I've never read an essay that I think was that much of a difference maker. So I think there's even kind of an element of chance for these people who get crazy lucky. So yeah, and generally as far as editing services go, like there's only so much they can do. Like if you're not a great writer, there's only so much they can maybe do with the essay there too. So that's another factor to consider. Although you might get an editing service that practically rewrites it for you. We're not really that. What we're doing is trying to give you advice that pokes you in the right direction. But some people, will give a ton of advice, make some edits to the language, and the draft that comes back is still not very good.
And I'll also say, like, and not to like pitch our stuff too hard, I would go with somebody like us for like, what do we charge for 120, 30 bucks?
Yeah.
First, before you go to like one of these consultants that's going to charge you $3,000, right?
Yeah.
See if we can polish you up a little bit.
If
you're just kind of spinning in circles and you have no idea where to start and you need somebody to hold your hand every step of the way, then your dad says, hey, I don't care. I'm a lawyer, or I'm a business guy, and I've got $3,000 that's nothing to me. Why not, right? But it's not necessary. I'd say most people that I knew in law school, and we both went to a top 10 law school, 4th in the country, and we got into several other top 10 law schools. We didn't have consultants. We didn't mess around.
Yeah, and part of
that, you can do it by yourself.
If you know you can write too,
we got a few more. When I take a time test, I'll get 14 to 15 right in LR. After I mark the questions I got wrong and go back and attempt them again, I'll get 20 to 22 right. I can figure out why I'm missing the questions, but can't seem to catch those when I do another time section. So there's this 6-point difference, 7.8 point difference between timed and untimed in this case. How can they narrow that down, Evan?
I mean, practice is going to be the biggest factor there. Like the issue here is that you clearly have correct judgment. Just when you're under time pressure, you're either due to nerves or you're not using that judgment, or you don't have the time to sort of execute the plan. That's actually a good thing, right? Because you've shown that you have the potential to get these questions and understand it. So 99% of the time in this situation, the fix is just more practice to get the time down. The biggest thing that I would do here is don't necessarily go straight to 35 minutes right away. Why don't you try instead doing a section, see how long a section takes you on time, right? Maybe it takes 50 minutes on time. And then just shave 2-3 minutes off of that a day. And then if at any point you all of a sudden run into a wall where your accuracy suffers really bad, hold off for a while, practice at that level, and then just shave like a minute every couple days. Go down gradually to the 35 minutes. You don't have to go there right away necessarily.
All right, good. Thank you for that excellent answer, Evan. I just decided to attempt the LSAT. And in your opinion, what are the first steps to get started to prep for the LSAT? I would say, and I'll just take this one. I think for me, like, go our study schedule. It's like $20. It gives you a really great structure. It gives you the books to buy. It tells you how to do it. I mean, even if you don't use it from now until test day, if you can use it for at least the first few weeks to get an idea of what like a good study schedule would look like, and then you can kind of sort of take it on your own. I think that's what I would recommend. I mean, I think that's a really good way to get started. Would you recommend using a watch? We already got that one.
This one I wanted to get, and maybe we'll make this the last one. I think we're close here anyways. What would you suggest for somebody who's gone through all the practice tests? You know what? I used to think that the people in that situation were kind of in trouble, but then as I had more students that just kept reusing and redoing practice tests, I still noticed that these people make huge gains, right? So, you know, although those tests are no longer very good for accurately predicting where you're going to score on test day, they're still great practice, and you're still, you know, your brain's still making new connections and getting better at the logical patterns that you're going to encounter here. So just keep redoing tests at that point. Do the ones that you haven't done for the longest time, and redo them. You know, there's nothing else you can do. So you might just be happy to know that it appears to still work fine. Okay.
Any other questions? You want to answer one last one, Evan, before we sign off?
Yeah, sure. How can I improve on strength and weaken questions? You have to know about cause and effect reasoning. I think the majority of strength and weaken questions deal with causality. It can be difficult to spot. You know, in my course, I think that I think at least like 6-7 lessons that are devoted to causality. But then you want to, like, with that concept in your head, once you understand how cause and effect work, arguments work, and how to weaken and strengthen them, you want to, like, then immediately practice a ton of strengthen and weaken questions and get good at recognizing this cause and effect argument structure and manipulating that. When you do that, you're going to be good at strengthen and weaken questions. You know, the other thing is understanding inductive reasoning more generally. You know, we can also help you out with that. But okay.
All right. Well, for anybody who is, for the 60-year viewer, so who are still here after 70, 80 minutes, thank you for sticking around all the way to the end. Great session tonight. LSATcourses.com, or just visit our website and go to the products and services and find the full LSAT course. $75. I mean, it's like the cheapest thing you could possibly buy.
Yeah.
In LSAT, for biggest bang for your buck from now until Monday, and then that price is going to go double.
Much content-wise in this as something that you're going to spend $1,000 on. Like, I promise. In fact, I think there's more in terms of actual content than anything else that's out there. You know, yeah. So what if we don't have, like, videos with little, like, professional animations or whatever? You know, like,
those are actually really distracting on certain course that that rhymes with shoe bent.
Yeah, shoe bent. Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, guys,
anyway, thanks everybody. Yeah, thanks for all the great questions. If you're taking the LSAT in a couple days, I just want to remind you that you got this. If you've been doing these practice tests, if you've been, doing any, if you've done more than a handful of prep tests, you are more prepared than most people. If you're here tonight, chances are you are more prepared than most people. So go in there with confidence and crush this thing in a couple days here. Love to hear from everybody after the test, and let us know how things go in the comments on the webinar. We'll once again post the link to the LSAT course, and we'll post the video on the webinar post on Lawschooli.com. Thanks for coming tonight. Good night, everybody, and good luck on the LSAT.
Thank you. Good night.
Good job, Evan.
Thanks, man. Talk to you later.
Night, everyone.